When a man rejects everyone, the world assumes he is impossible to please. The truth is usually much stranger. My name is Emma Carter, and before the city started whispering my name, I was invisible. But this story does not begin with me. It begins with William Hayes. If you asked anyone in New York who William Hayes was, they would tell you the same thing. Billionaire. Genius. Untouchable. The kind of man whose decisions could move markets before breakfast. Yet there was one thing people talked about more than his success. He rejected every woman who came near him. At first, people treated it like a joke. Then it became a challenge. Then it became an obsession. Over the years, socialites, celebrities, models, business heiresses, and influencers all tried to become the woman who finally captured William Hayes. None succeeded. The newspapers called him cold. The internet called him mysterious. Matchmakers called him their greatest failure. One article even counted 100 different women who had been introduced to him through family connections, charity events, business functions, and exclusive parties. 100 opportunities. 100 polite rejections. On a chilly October evening, the latest attempt unfolded inside one of Manhattan's most luxurious hotels. Crystal chandeliers hung above a ballroom filled with some of the city's wealthiest families. Expensive gowns shimmered beneath golden lights. Laughter echoed across the room. Everyone was waiting for William Hayes. The moment he entered, conversations slowed. Even from photographs, people could recognize him instantly. Tall. Composed. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit. His expression remained calm as he greeted investors, executives, and community leaders. He looked comfortable discussing billion-dollar projects. He looked completely uncomfortable when a woman approached him. Across the room, a famous socialite named Clara Monroe smiled confidently and walked toward him. Her family had spent weeks arranging the introduction. Cameras immediately turned in their direction. Guests exchanged excited glances. Maybe this would finally be the woman. Clara extended her hand. William shook it politely. She began a conversation. He listened respectfully. 5 minutes later, she walked away alone. No drama. No embarrassment. Just another rejection. The pattern repeated itself throughout the evening. A model. A business heiress. A television personality. Each conversation ended exactly the same way. William remained courteous, professional, uninterested. By the end of the event, frustration filled the room. One elderly investor finally laughed and asked the question everyone wanted answered. William, are you planning to stay single forever? The ballroom grew quiet. William glanced toward the crowd. A faint smile touched his face. I am waiting for the right person. The answer should have sounded romantic. Instead, it sounded impossible. Because nobody believed such a person existed. As the evening ended, guests returned home carrying new rumors. Some claimed William hated relationships. Others insisted he was married to his career. Nobody knew the truth. Meanwhile, 30 miles away from that glamorous ballroom, I finished cleaning the reception desk of a small neighborhood clinic. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above me. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the empty parking lot. I checked tomorrow's appointment schedule and turned off the front desk lamp. It was an ordinary night. An ordinary job. An ordinary life. I had no idea that somewhere across the city, the man who rejected 100 women had just taken another step toward finding the one person he had been waiting for. The next morning started like every other morning in my life. The alarm on my phone buzzed at exactly 6:30. I got up, washed my face with cold water, and prepared for another shift at the clinic. The small medical center where I worked was located between a bakery and a convenience store. Nothing about it suggested that anything important would ever happen there. That was what I used to believe about my entire life. But something had changed, even if the world around me had not noticed yet. As I walked through the clinic doors, the familiar scent of disinfectant and fresh paper charts filled the air. My coworker greeted me with a tired smile. Busy night. Ahead, she said. I nodded and tied my hair back. Ordinary tasks followed. Checking schedules. Preparing patient files. Answering phone calls. Each action felt familiar, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I kept remembering the ballroom from the night before. The man everyone called untouchable. William Hayes. I had only ever seen him in photographs or on screens. Yet something about him lingered in my mind longer than it should have. It was not his wealth or reputation. It was the silence he carried, as if the world's expectations never reached him. Around mid-morning, a call came into the clinic. The front desk phone rang twice before I picked it up. City Medical Transport, I answered. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. We are sending a patient who needs immediate evaluation. Possible cardiac symptoms. High priority. I confirmed the details and prepared the intake area. 10 minutes later, the doors opened. A team of paramedics rushed in pushing a stretcher. I stepped forward automatically, focusing on procedure rather than emotion. The patient was an older man, pale and breathing unevenly. Behind the stretcher walked several assistants in formal attire, clearly out of place in a clinic like ours. One of them gave instructions in a controlled voice. He needs private care. No interruptions. I nodded and guided the team to the treatment room. As I followed them inside, I noticed another figure standing near the entrance. Tall, composed, dressed in a dark coat that looked far too expensive for this environment. For a moment I thought I was imagining things. Then he stepped forward into the light. William Hayes. My breath paused for a fraction of a second, but I forced myself to remain professional. He was not the patient. He was observing everything quietly, his eyes scanning the room with careful attention. I lowered my gaze and focused on my task. We will stabilize him first, I said calmly. The medical team began working immediately. Machines were prepared. Monitors were attached. The room filled with quiet urgency. William did not speak. He simply watched. That silence felt different from anything I had experienced before. It was not judgment. It was observation. When the patient's condition stabilized slightly, I stepped out to review notes. As I exited the room, I almost collided with William in the hallway. I quickly stepped aside. "Excuse me," I said. He looked at me for the first time directly, not like someone passing through, like someone noticing. His eyes paused on my face for a brief moment longer than necessary. "You are the nurse in charge?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." There was a short silence before he spoke again. "You are very calm under pressure." It was not a compliment delivered casually. It sounded like a conclusion he had reached after careful observation. I hesitated slightly. "It is part of the job." He nodded once as if accepting that answer, but his gaze did not leave me immediately. For a moment, the noise of the clinic faded around us. Then a nurse called my name from the other end of the hallway. I turned to respond, but when I looked back, William had already moved away. As I returned to my work, I tried to ignore the strange feeling settling in my chest. It was not excitement. It was not fear. It was something quieter, like the sense that a door had just opened somewhere, even if I could not yet see what was on the other side. For the rest of the afternoon, I told myself the encounter meant nothing. Important people visited clinics every day. Wealthy executives passed through the city constantly. There was no reason to believe William Hayes would remember a brief conversation in a crowded hallway. By the time my shift ended, I had almost convinced myself of that. Almost. Outside, the sky had turned a soft shade of gray. Autumn air drifted through the streets as I walked toward the subway station, carrying a canvas bag filled with groceries and paperwork. The city moved around me in its usual rhythm. Taxi horns echoed in the distance. Office workers hurried toward home. Street vendors packed away their carts. Everything felt normal again. Then my phone rang. It was the clinic manager. "Emma, I am sorry to call after your shift," she said. "But we need a favor." I stopped walking. "What happened?" "The patient from earlier is requesting a follow-up visit tomorrow morning. His family specifically asked whether you would be available." I blinked in surprise. "Me? Apparently you made a good impression." After a brief pause, I agreed. It seemed harmless enough. The next morning arrived faster than expected. When I entered the clinic, the atmosphere already felt different. Several unfamiliar vehicles were parked outside. Security personnel stood discreetly near the entrance. Inside, the older patient from the previous day occupied a private examination room. He looked healthier now. Color had returned to his face. The moment he saw me, he smiled warmly. "You must be Emma. And you must be feeling better," I replied. His laugh filled the room. "Much better." During the appointment, I learned his name was Robert Hayes, William's grandfather. Unlike his grandson's reserved personality, Robert seemed to enjoy conversation. He asked questions about the neighborhood, the clinic, my work, my family. By the end of the visit, he somehow knew more about me than most people I had known for years. As I completed paperwork, another voice appeared behind me. "Grandfather, you promised not to interrogate medical staff." I turned immediately. William stood in the doorway. Sunlight from the hallway outlined his tall frame. Robert laughed again. I was making conversation. William's expression remained calm, but there was a trace of amusement in his eyes. "That is what worries me." For a moment, all three of us shared an unexpectedly comfortable silence. Then Robert pointed toward me. "This young woman is impressive." I felt my face warm slightly. William glanced in my direction. I noticed. The simple words should not have affected me, yet somehow they did. After the appointment ended, I walked Robert toward the exit. As he prepared to leave, he unexpectedly reached for my hand. "Thank you for your kindness," he said. "The world needs more people like you." Before I could respond, William stepped forward. "I will see that the clinic receives a donation for its support." My eyes widened. "That is not necessary." William looked directly at me. "Perhaps not. But it is deserved." Something about the way he said it felt sincere rather than performative. Moments later, they departed. Through the clinic window, I watched their vehicles disappear into city traffic. The day continued. Patients arrived. Calls were answered. Reports were completed. Yet my thoughts kept returning to one detail. William had noticed me. Not as part of the room. Not as another employee. As me. And somewhere across the city, a man who had spent years rejecting everyone found himself thinking about a woman he had only met twice. The following week should have returned everything to normal. Instead, small changes began appearing in places I never expected. The clinic received new equipment that administrators had been requesting for years. Broken computers were replaced. Examination rooms were renovated. Additional supplies arrived without delay. Officially, the improvements came from a charitable healthcare initiative. Unofficially, everyone knew where the funding originated. Nobody complained. The upgrades helped patients. That was what mattered. Still, every time I walked past the new equipment, I found myself thinking about William Hayes. One rainy afternoon, the clinic lost power during a severe storm. Emergency systems activated immediately, but several appointments needed to be rescheduled. Most patients left early. By 6 o'clock, only a handful of staff members remained. I stayed behind to organize paperwork before heading home. Outside, rain struck the windows in steady waves. The parking lot looked almost deserted beneath the streetlights. I was gathering files when the front doors opened unexpectedly. A familiar figure stepped inside carrying an umbrella. William Hayes. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining him. He looked slightly out of place standing inside the small reception area, surrounded by worn chairs and faded magazines. Yet somehow he also looked completely comfortable. "You are still here," he said. I glanced toward the storm outside. "Most people are." A faint smile appeared. "Fair point." He explained that he had been returning from a nearby meeting when the weather became too severe to continue driving safely. The clinic happened to be the closest building. It sounded reasonable enough. Yet, something told me that a man with access to countless offices across the city could have stopped almost anywhere. We spoke quietly while rain continued falling beyond the glass doors. For the first time, the conversation felt natural rather than accidental. We discussed work, community programs, books, childhood memories. Nothing extraordinary. Yet the minutes passed surprisingly quickly. At one point, I reached across the reception desk to retrieve a folder from a lower shelf. The sleeve of my cardigan slipped slightly down my arm. I did not notice immediately. William did. His expression changed so subtly that most people would have missed it. His eyes paused near my wrist, specifically on the small sunflower-shaped birthmark just below it. I had lived with that mark my entire life. Most people barely noticed it. Others considered it unusual. To me, it was simply part of who I was. But William stared at it as though he had discovered something impossible. The room grew unexpectedly quiet. When I looked up, he seemed almost distracted. "Is something wrong?" I asked. For a second he did not answer. Then he shook his head lightly. "No." Yet his gaze returned briefly to the birthmark before shifting away again. Something had changed. I could feel it. Not in a dramatic way. In a way that felt deeper and harder to explain. The rain eventually softened. Staff members finished their remaining tasks and left for the evening. Soon, only William and I remained in the reception area. As I prepared to leave, he surprised me with an unusual question. "Have you always had that sunflower mark?" I looked down instinctively before smiling. "Since birth." He nodded slowly. The answer seemed important to him. More important than it should have been. Neither of us spoke for several seconds afterward. Then William opened the clinic door and held the umbrella toward me. "Allow me to walk you to your car." I hesitated briefly before accepting. Together we stepped into the cool evening air. Rain shimmered beneath the streetlights. The city felt quieter than usual. And somewhere between the clinic entrance and the parking lot, a connection neither of us fully understood began growing. Stronger than either of us expected. The morning after the storm, I expected life to return to normal. Instead, the city seemed determined to remind me that something unusual was happening. It started with a newspaper headline displayed outside a coffee shop near the clinic. "William Hayes attends private charity dinner." Beneath the title was a photograph of him entering a luxury venue surrounded by cameras and reporters. Normally, I would have walked past without a second glance. This time I stopped. Not because of the article. Because I remembered the man standing beside me beneath a single umbrella only hours earlier. The contrast felt impossible. To the world, he was one of the most powerful men in the country. To me, he was becoming something much harder to define. The clinic remained busy throughout the day. Patients arrived one after another. Children with seasonal illnesses. Elderly neighbors needing routine care. Families seeking reassurance. The familiar rhythm helped keep my thoughts focused. Yet every so often, my mind drifted back to the conversation from the previous evening. More specifically, to the moment William had noticed the sunflower-shaped birthmark on my wrist. The memory stayed with me longer than it should have. Around noon, my coworker rushed toward the reception desk holding her phone. Her eyes were wide with excitement. "Emma, look at this." I glanced at the screen. An entertainment website had published a story discussing William Hayes once again rejecting a high-profile introduction arranged by influential families. The article included photographs from several recent social events. Models, socialites, business heirs. Every one of them had received the same polite distance. "He turns down everyone," my coworker said. "I do not understand it." Neither did the reporters. Neither did the city. Yet for the first time, I wondered if William himself fully understood it. 3 days later, the situation became even stranger. A representative from the Hayes Foundation arrived at the clinic carrying documents regarding a long-term partnership program. Additional funding, educational resources, expanded services. The director nearly cried. From relief, staff members celebrated throughout the afternoon. The entire neighborhood would benefit. Officially, the support came from corporate outreach efforts. Unofficially, everyone connected the timing to recent events. By evening, rumors began circulating. Some employees joked that one of our patients must secretly know a billionaire. Others speculated about political connections. I said nothing. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, a black vehicle waited quietly across the street. My pulse quickened slightly. The passenger window lowered. William sat inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. City lights reflected across the glass. "Good evening," he said calmly. "Good evening." A faint smile touched his face. "I hope I am not causing problems." I immediately understood what he meant. The foundation support. The attention. The rumors. People are talking, I admitted. People always talk. His answer was so simple that I laughed despite myself. William seemed pleased by the reaction. Then his expression softened slightly. Would you like dinner? The question was direct. No dramatic speech. No ilaveratum betaschen. Just a straightforward request. I hesitated for a moment, not because I wanted to refuse, but because everything felt surreal. A billionaire CEO known for rejecting everyone was sitting outside a small clinic asking me to share a meal. Finally, I nodded. Yes. Something changed in his eyes then. Relief. Satisfaction. Perhaps both. As I entered the vehicle, neither of us noticed the photographer standing half a block away. But by the following morning, the entire city would. And for the first time, people would begin asking a question far more interesting than why William Hayes rejected 100 women. They would start asking who the woman beside him was. The photograph spread across the internet faster than anyone expected. By 8 o'clock the next morning, it appeared on entertainment websites, business blogs, and social media accounts throughout the city. The image itself was simple. William Hayes standing beside me outside a restaurant. Nothing dramatic. Nothing scandalous. Yet the reaction was immediate. Because for years, people had searched for any sign that William was interested in someone. Now they finally had one. I discovered the story before reaching work. My phone began vibrating continuously during my subway ride. Messages from coworkers, friends, distant relatives I had not spoken to in months. Everyone wanted the same answer. Who was the woman in the photograph? By the time I arrived at the clinic, several employees were already waiting near the reception desk. Their expressions made it clear they had seen everything. Emma, one nurse said carefully. Is there something you would like to tell us? I laughed despite myself. Not really. Unfortunately, the internet disagreed. Throughout the day, articles continued appearing. Some journalists described me as a mystery woman. Others called me William's secret girlfriend. One headline boldly suggested that New York's most eligible billionaire had finally fallen in love. That article alone received millions of views. Meanwhile, the people who had spent years trying to attract William's attention reacted far less gracefully. Clara Monroe appeared on television that afternoon during an interview. While discussing an unrelated charity event, she somehow found a way to mention William. Her smile remained perfect throughout the segment. Her tone did not. Some people enjoy temporary attention, she said. The spotlight usually moves on. The comments spread online within hours. Everyone understood who she meant. Similar remarks followed from other socialites and influencers who had once pursued William. Their criticism remained polite on the surface. Underneath, jealousy became increasingly obvious. Yet while the city obsessed over rumors, William appeared completely unaffected. Late that evening, after my shift ended, a familiar black vehicle waited near the clinic once again. This time, photographers stood half a block away pretending not to watch. William opened the passenger door before I could reach it. You have become popular, he observed. I shook my head. This is your fault. To my surprise, he smiled. A genuine smile. Not polite. Not reserved. Real. Probably. During dinner, I expected him to address the attention directly. Instead, he spoke about everything except the headlines. Community projects. Business expansion. A book he recently finished reading. At first, I found the approach strange. Then I realized what he was doing. He was treating me exactly the same as before. The rumors meant nothing to him. I mattered. The rest was noise. That realization stayed with me long after the meal ended. A few days later, William invited me to attend a fundraising event supporting children's healthcare programs. The invitation itself created another wave of public speculation. Advisors questioned the decision. Public relations consultants suggested alternatives. William ignored all of them. When the evening arrived, I stood beside him in a ballroom filled with influential guests. Conversations paused as we entered. Curious eyes followed us across the room. For the first time, I understood what life inside William's world felt like. Constant observation. Endless judgment. expectations everywhere. Yet throughout the evening, William remained beside me. Not possessively, not dramatically, simply consistently. Every time someone attempted to dismiss me, he included me in the conversation. Every time someone questioned my place there, he made it clear I belonged. As the event ended, one wealthy donor approached him directly. "William," the man said, "people are wondering why you suddenly changed your mind about relationships." The room grew slightly quieter. Several nearby guests listened carefully. William glanced toward me before answering. His expression remained calm. "I did not change my standards," he said. Then he looked back at the donor. "I simply found someone who met them." And for the first time, the entire room understood that whatever was happening between us was becoming impossible to ignore. The days following the charity event felt different in a way I could not easily explain. It was not the attention from the media or the sudden increase in public curiosity. I had experienced enough rumors in the past few days to understand that attention always faded. What felt different was William himself. He did not behave like a man reacting to public speculation. He behaved like someone who had already made a decision and saw no reason to reconsider it. That certainty unsettled me more than anything else. At the clinic, the atmosphere shifted again. More patients arrived than usual, and some of them seemed less interested in medical care and more interested in asking questions. A few even pretended to recognize me from the news. I kept my responses professional, but I noticed how quickly private life and public perception were beginning to overlap. By late afternoon, my supervisor pulled me aside. "We are receiving unusual attention," she said carefully. "It may affect clinic operations." I nodded. I understood what she meant. Even if nothing inappropriate was happening, perception alone was enough to create complications. After work, I stepped outside expecting a quiet walk home. Instead, I found William waiting near the entrance again. This time he was not alone. Two assistants stood a few feet behind him, holding documents and tablets. He stepped forward immediately when he saw me. "I need to speak with you," he said. I glanced at the assistants. "About what?" He hesitated briefly, then motioned for us to move aside. We walked a short distance down the street until the noise from the clinic faded behind us. The evening air was cool, and city lights had begun reflecting off the pavement. William stopped near a quiet corner. "The situation is becoming complicated," he said. I exhaled slowly. "You mean the attention?" He nodded. "Yes." I crossed my arms slightly. "It was your decision to appear publicly with me." "It was," he agreed without hesitation. That honesty surprised me. Most people would have deflected responsibility or softened the statement. William did neither. He continued, "And I do not regret it." The simplicity of that sentence left me silent for a moment. I studied his expression carefully, trying to understand what lay beneath it. There was no uncertainty. No hesitation. Only clarity. "Then what are you asking?" I finally said. He looked toward the street before answering. "I am asking if it is acceptable for things to continue as they are." The question was not romantic, not dramatic. It was direct, almost businesslike in structure, yet it carried weight that felt deeply personal. I realized then that William did not approach relationships the way most people did. For him, clarity mattered more than performance. I considered my answer carefully. Part of me wanted to step back, to avoid the growing attention, and return to a simpler life. Another part of me recognized something equally important. Nothing about my life had been simple before him. "I can handle it," I said quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. "That is not what I asked." I met his gaze. "Yes," I corrected myself. "It is acceptable." Something subtle shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps. Or confirmation. He nodded once. "Good." A silence followed that did not feel uncomfortable. Around us, the city continued its usual rhythm. Cars passed. People walked. Somewhere in the distance, sirens echoed faintly and disappeared. Yet in that moment, it felt as if everything had narrowed down to a single understanding between us. Before leaving, William spoke again. "Emma." I turned slightly. "Yes." He paused, then said, Do not let others define what this is. The words were simple, but they stayed with me longer than I expected, because I realized he was not referring to the public. He was referring to both of us. And for the first time since all of this began, I understood that whatever was forming between William Hayes and me was no longer something the world could easily explain or control. For a while, I believed I had adjusted to the changes in my life. I believed I understood what it meant to be connected to someone like William Hayes. Then I attended my first official event as his guest, and I realized how wrong I was. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a private fundraising gala supporting healthcare initiatives across the state. Hundreds of influential guests, business leaders, philanthropists, public figures, people whose names appeared regularly in newspapers and financial magazines. The kind of event I had only ever seen from a distance. When William asked whether I wanted to attend, my first instinct was to decline. Not because I lacked interest, because I suddenly felt out of place. He noticed my hesitation immediately. "You do not have to go," he said. "I know." I looked down at the invitation resting on my kitchen table. Everyone there belongs in that world. William's expression remained calm. "And who decided you do not?" I had no answer. That was the problem. The doubt came from years of assuming certain doors were not meant for people like me. The gala took place 2 nights later inside one of the city's most prestigious cultural centers. Crystal lights reflected from marble floors. Elegant music drifted through the halls. Conversations echoed beneath high ceilings decorated with gold accents and artwork worth more than my entire apartment building. As William and I entered together, I felt dozens of eyes turn toward us. Not toward him. Toward us. The realization made my stomach tighten slightly. Throughout the evening, guests greeted William with admiration and respect. Yet something else quickly became obvious. Many of them were studying me, comparing me to expectations they had carried for years. Several women who had once hoped to attract William attended the event as well. Their smiles remained polite. Their disappointment did not. One woman approached during dinner. She introduced herself warmly before asking where I attended college. Another asked about my family background. A third seemed particularly interested in learning how long I had known William. Every question sounded harmless. Together, they felt like an examination. I answered honestly. A public university. A working-class neighborhood. A small clinic. Nothing impressive by their standards. Yet every time a conversation became uncomfortable, William redirected it effortlessly. Not by creating conflict, by making it clear that my presence required no justification. Later in the evening, we stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city skyline. Cool air replaced the noise of the ballroom. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I leaned lightly against the railing. I think they expected someone different. William looked out across the city. Probably. His honesty made me laugh quietly. Then I turned toward him. "Does it bother you?" This time he looked directly at me. No, the answer came immediately. Without hesitation. Without qualification. "Why not?" He considered the question for only a second. "Because I did not choose someone for them." The simplicity of those words left me silent. Down below, traffic moved through the city like rivers of light. Somewhere inside the building, music continued playing. Yet in that moment, everything felt strangely still. "You make this seem easy," I said softly. William shook his head. "It is not easy." I blinked in surprise. "Then why does it look easy?" A faint smile appeared. "Because some decisions stop being difficult once you know they are right." His answer stayed with me long after the event ended. On the drive home, I stared through the window at the city passing by. For weeks, I had been trying to understand William's growing attention. His consistency. His certainty. His refusal to let public opinion influence private decisions. That night, I finally realized something important. The attention surrounding us was overwhelming. The expectations were exhausting. The scrutiny was constant. Yet none of those things seemed to affect him. Because while everyone else was still deciding what they thought about me, William had already made up his mind. The first time I understood what William Hayes truly meant by certainty was not during a grand speech or an expensive event. It was on an ordinary morning that felt almost too quiet to be important. The clinic was slower than usual. Fewer patients. Softer noise. The kind of calm that makes you notice your own thoughts more clearly than you should. I was reviewing patient notes at the front desk when the receptionist quietly informed me that someone was waiting outside for me. "It is not a patient," she said. "He asked for you specifically." I already knew who it was before I looked up. William stood near the entrance with no entourage, no assistants, and no visible urgency. Just him. Calm as always. As if waiting was not an inconvenience but a choice. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "This is unexpected," I said. He nodded slightly. "I needed to speak with you away from the noise." I studied his expression carefully. "About what?" A pause followed. "Not uncomfortable. Intentional. About clarity," he said. The word immediately reminded me of our earlier conversations. The way he always chose precision over emotion when describing things that others would overcomplicate. I crossed my arms lightly. "Clarity about what exactly?" He looked toward the street before answering. "About what this is becoming." My heartbeat shifted slightly. Not faster. Heavier. "And what is it becoming?" I asked. William turned back toward me. His gaze steady. Unwavering. Something I do not intend to misunderstand. The answer should have been simple. Instead, it carried weight I could not ignore. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Cars passed behind us. The city continued its routine. Yet the space between us felt separate from everything else. "You realize people are not going to stop talking," I said quietly. "They already have opinions about this." William nodded once. "People always form opinions. And you do not care?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "I care about accuracy," he replied. "Not interpretation." That distinction stayed with me. Accuracy versus interpretation. Reality versus perception. It sounded simple, but it was not. I looked away briefly, gathering my thoughts. "You make it sound like this is already decided." "It is," he said. "No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty." I turned back toward him. "And what if I am not?" A subtle shift appeared in his expression. Not confusion. Awareness. As if he had already accounted for that possibility long before I voiced it. "Then I will wait," he said. The answer surprised me more than anything else he had said so far. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was patient. I had expected pressure. Expectation. Movement toward control. Instead, there was stillness. "You make waiting sound simple," I said. William shook his head slightly. "It is not simple. It is necessary." The wind moved lightly between us. I suddenly realized how quiet everything had become. Even the traffic seemed distant. "Most people do not wait like that," I said. "Most people choose what is easiest," he replied. "I do not." There was no pride in his voice. No performance. Only fact. I studied him for a long moment. "Why me?" The question finally escaped before I could stop it. William did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with the same steady focus he had shown from the beginning. The same attention that had first unsettled me. Then he spoke. "Because you are the first person who did not try to become what I expected." The words landed quietly, but they stayed. I felt something shift inside me again. Not confusion this time. Understanding. For weeks, I had believed I was trying to figure him out. But standing there, I realized something unexpected. He had been observing me just as carefully. Not evaluating. Recognizing. And in that moment, I understood the truth neither of us had said aloud yet. This was no longer about chance meetings or coincidence. It was about choice. And William Hayes had already made his.